Alright, so here we're going to go over kind of a multiple button door. So originally we made our key and door, so when we pick up our key, it'll open our door. But what we're looking to do here is basically have three different keys, so to speak, that you have to pick up in a particular order in order to open the door. And if you don't do it in the right order, it resets it and you have to start again. So what we kind of set up here is one blueprint with three buttons. We're just calling them buttons in this scenario. And when I hit, or let's just see it in action. If we look at the top left, we'll see a little print string of what's going on. So if I hit button 1, if I just walk into it, we say button 1 is active. We go into button 2 is active. But, you know, we're going 1, 2, 3. That's the order we got to go. So we went 1, 2. If we go back to 1, it's going to say buttons reset. And then if I try to go to 2 again, it's going to say buttons reset. So it's all reset. But if I go 1, button 1 active, 2, button 2 active, then button 3, door opening, there we go. And then we're good to go. So what we got going here is basically we have to hit these buttons in order 1, 2, 3 to open the door. So if you just have miscellaneous quote-unquote keys or objects you need to interact with, you know, what exactly these are visually represented by is arbitrary. So you can switch them up as you want. And once your blueprint's in the world, for example, I can move these around and position them wherever I want. So, you know, in theory, if you had three things you need to interact with, but you got to figure out the order, you would just alter the look of each of these buttons so that they are your object, and then you can place them throughout your world so that your player can find them and interact with them. But the base functionality will look like this. So we have a blueprint made. This is all within one blueprint. So let's open it up and let's have a look at it here. So it's a little more complex, but the logic is all stuff we've used before. So if we go to the viewport, we can see kind of how it's built. So what's important here is definitely making sure things are parented properly. So what I recommend is whatever objects you want to use to represent each of these buttons, they are like the base, and then the trigger for the button, and ignore the text render, these are just for visual representation, but the trigger, make sure that it's parented to the object so that wherever you move the object, the trigger comes with it. But we got three buttons here, 1, 2, and 3. So three objects, they can be whatever you want them to be, and then each object has its own trigger, button 1, 2, and 3. Additionally, I made three variables, Boolean variables, button 1 active, button 2 active, button 3 active. So remember, this is the order we need to activate them, but the thought here is that you can move these around wherever you want. So, you know, you can have one way over here, you can have two all over the place. You know, they can be wherever, and they can look like whatever. So where you place them in the world is how you'll get that, like, code, so to speak. Cool. But so that's the setup we got going here. So you'll need to build that. So we need three variables and three triggers. Let's have a look at the event graph. So the event graph, there's a little bit going on here, but let's talk through it. So here's the plan. So we're going to interact with one of our buttons. We got three overlaps here, one for each button. Button, 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 button 1, button 2, button 3. And when we overlap them, we're going to do a couple things. First off, when we overlap, we're going to set that button to true, so it's active. You know, our Boolean set to true, and we're good to go. So when we overlap button 1 active. When we overlap button 2 active. When we overlap button 3 active. But additionally, to see that, we have to also check that the previous button in the sequence is also active. So as we go down, we're going to add additional things. So we talk through it. So when we press button 1, We only want button 1 to run if all the other buttons are inactive. So in the scenario of button 1, we're going to overlap. We're going to check, is button 1 active? If button 1 is not active, so it's false, we're going to set it to active. And then we'll do a little print string just for a little visual feedback saying button 1 active. Cool. Great. So if button 1 is active, that means we've already selected it and we're selecting it in the wrong order. We're going to instead run the reset buttons. We'll look at what that is in a moment. But let's say we've hit button 1, we haven't pressed any yet. Button 1 is now active. We're good to go to find button 2. We find button 2. We press it. It needs to check, first off, is button 1 active? If button 1 is not active, so this is the first button we've selected, we're going to reset all the buttons. We've done it in the wrong order. If button 1 is active, that means we've selected that one. We've already selected button 1. This is our second one. So we can proceed to set button 2 to active. And then same thing for button 3. So we press button 3. We check, is button 2 active? Because that's the important one here. So if button 2 is active, we're good to go. We're good to set button 3 to active. And then if button 2 is not active, we've done it in the wrong order, we're going to reset the buttons. And so this system is expandable. You can keep going on and on and on as long as you want, as many components as you need. But in our case, button 3 is the final one in the chain. So after we set button 3 to active, we say button 3 active. This branch here, you don't necessarily need, because if button 3 is active, it kind of serves the same purpose as this, but just to show what we're doing here, we're going to then check, okay, are all 3 buttons active? If they're all active, we can continue on, and we're going to, in our case, we're going to go open our door, but you can do whatever. So this is, this varies depending on your goal. So again, it's just a series of checking different booleans, press button 1, is it active, is it inactive? Depending on the answer to that, we're going to do different things. So in all these cases, the negative option, or the one that says, hey, you did this in the wrong order, is we're going to reset the buttons. So we're going to set them all back to false. So to do that, we've created what's called a custom event. So rather than add a million nodes once after another that just set everything back to false, what we can do is we can build a custom event that we name reset buttons that just does all that. So you can see when we run the reset buttons event, it's going to go through each one, button 1, button 2, button 3, and set them to false. And then I gave a little print string just so we know what happened. Buttons reset. So just to show, if you type in custom event, you can create a custom event. We call it, reset, and then we can build off of this. And then, off of any other pin, we can search up our custom event. So reset buttons, and then we can basically call and activate our custom event. So that's what we got going here. We just got a bunch of booleans, and we're just swapping between, checking if the previous button in the chain is active or not. And then if it's active, we can move on to the next one. If it's not active, we reset everything, and they have to try again. That enables you to do a bunch of guess and check. So again, this little check here, you don't necessarily need. You could just go right from button 3 active to your door opening sequence or whatever, but it'll get you there. So that's the code. We'll zoom in on it a little bit here. There's that. Here's our custom event. And here's this part, which again will vary depending on what you want. Remember, a big part of making this work is having your 3 or more objects that represent your different buttons, and they each need to have a collision tied to it, so parented underneath it, so that whenever you move the object, the trigger comes with it. So just to show, if I place my, let me just get rid of this blueprint for a sec. If I drag my blueprint into the scene, there it is. If I want to reposition these buttons, if you double click on one of the objects, that'll kind of select it within the blueprint, and now I can move it around. So if I want to reposition, button 3 over here, I want to reposition button 2 over here, I can do so within the level itself. I don't have to do it within the blueprint. So you just make sure your blueprint's set up. Make sure your blueprint is set up properly with proper parenting, so that when you move the object, the trigger comes with it. So now, even though these are moved around, I can still play, and I can, let's see, we can go to button 1 active, button 2 active, here's button 3 active, door opens. And there we go. So, this system, like I said, can be expanded to have as many different triggers as you want. It would just be a matter of, for each additional button, you just have an additional overlap event, an additional Boolean, and then, the code would basically be the same. You just check for the previous button in the system. But that's that. So that's kind of a multi-switch door that you have to press in a specific order.